Good morning and welcome back to the fourth day of Archival Assembly and the third day of the Symposium. My little ritual first, if there are any undetected doctors in the room, please come up to me and reveal yourselves so that I can capture your signature for the DFG. We're at 29 now, so only 11 to go. If you have friends with PhDs, bring them in, relatives, grandmothers, anyone with a PhD counts. Thank you for your support. And with that, I hand over the microphone to Helene and the panel on the ethics of curating sound.
Hello, good morning. My name is Helene and I do not have a PhD. But, sorry, my sister has one. I will invite her. Yeah. So welcome to panel number 5 of the Archival Assembly, Does This Sound Right? The Ethics of Curating Sound. I'm actually making a little joke for myself and I've been calling it, whoop, whoop, it's the sound of the soundtrack police. But it's actually, it's not as much about policing, but we will have panelists that mostly are affiliated with state institutions that work with film heritage or work for those kind of institutions. But I think the central part, what we will be speaking about today is about handling film heritage with care. I think care is the central word here. These are no accidental archivists. These are professional archivists, if we want to use those categories. But this is, of course, not a profession you choose by accident. It's a profession you choose out of passion. And it's also, these are professions that are very specific and come with a lot of considerations, ethical, aesthetic, sometimes also practical and technical considerations. So that's what we will be speaking about today. My name is Helene Gerritsen. I'm the director of Go East Festival of Central and Eastern European Film, and I'm very glad to be invited here today. And the panelists that I will introduce to you right now, from my left to right, are Matěj Strnad. He's the head curator at Národní filmový archiv in Prague, which is the Czech National Film Archive. And Matěj is the he coordinates his department as well as special acquisitions, restoration, and curatorial projects. He is also currently drafting the institution's collection policy. Matěj graduated from FAMU, from the Center for Audiovisual Studies at FAMU, and he also lectures there right now on audiovisual archiving. He serves as the head of programming and access to collections commission of the FIAF, the Fédération Internationale des Archives du Film. And I think you also brought some colleagues of yours from the Foley archive, so maybe they, after your presentation, would like to add something to the conversation as well. Welcome, Matěj. Yes, of course, applause. And then, looking spectacular in pink, is Eunice Martins. She's a composer and pianist. She studied at the University of Arts in Berlin and the Musikakademie Wiesbaden, where I am currently located. And since 2000, she has been the resident pianist at Arsenal Cinema. Eunice has performed her music for film and silent film, as well as live compositions at numerous international film festivals, theaters and cinematheques, including the 79th Venice Film Biennale, the Giornata del Cinema Muto in Pordenone, the Hong Kong International Film Festival, Il Cinema Ritrovato, and also in Sao Paulo, Taipei, Shanghai, Paris, and Brussels. And also very interesting, she hosts projects and workshops for children and adolescents, composing for and with film in Berlin and Brussels. And this coming Sunday, she will actually do a live sound workshop for children at the Arsenal Cinema. And of course, adults are also welcome, but bring your kids. Welcome, Eunice. And then we have Sonia Campanini, who has been researching film and sound archiving since 2014, actually, when she did her PhD at Amsterdam University. Sonia is a film and media scholar. Her research focuses on archiving, restoration, curating, and also the circulation of global film cultures. From 2015 to 2022, she was an assistant professor for film culture at Goethe University in Frankfurt. She's still affiliated with the Goethe University. And she was also a visiting professor of the Fonte Foundation at the Film University Babelsberg, Konrad Wolf. Also next year, her book is coming out with the title Curating Film Sound Theories and Practices in Preservation and Presentation, next year with Amsterdam University Press, if I'm correct. Yes. So that's something to look forward to, and I'm also looking forward to your presentation in which you will present a little bit of your research. So without much further ado, I would like to invite Matěj. Oh, yes. And I was actually planning to ask questions to each of the panelists directly afterwards, but as you can see, there's 3 instead of 2. So I think we will just do the presentations one after the other, and then we will all come together for the discussion, and I will also open the floor. Enjoy.
Thank you, Helene. And thank you, Stephanie, Ella, Vincent, Markus, and the whole of the Archival Assembly team for this invitation and opportunity to offer what I decided to call a position statement. It can hopefully illustrate some of the thinking behind the archival and institutional decision-making, feed into our panel discussion, and it indeed has helped me personally, as you have already heard. I'm still struggling with finishing a draft of our collection policy. To offer a position statement, I need to describe very briefly where I come from. I work as the head of curators in Národní filmový archiv in Prague, the Czech National Film Archive, which used to count itself among the largest and oldest film archives in the world. I'm actually not sure if and in how far that still holds, but indeed we have a large collection and carry a lot of historical baggage with us. But what is perhaps more important in our context here is that we are a public institution, or national even, if you want, somehow on par with the likes of the National Gallery, the National Museum, the National Library, etc. That's why it is also always so great to work together with more independent film heritage institutions such as the Arsenal, or let's say dependent just the same only on other stuff. We have a national mandate when it comes to Czech cinema, but our international collection is also rather substantial. Our somehow privileged standing stems from the fact that Czechoslovak film industry was nationalized between 1945 and 1992, and the producers' rights for these films have come to us. For our ministry, it is a rather convenient arrangement, as they only have to subsidize us partially, and we have to make about 2/3 of our budget from licensing Czech cinema. The Czech audiovisual law prescribes that we ask for an access fee for Czech films, even where the producer's rights have expired, which is 50 years after their first showing. Then there are also authors' economic rights, which have to be dealt with and last 70 years after the death of the given author. So people come to us for films, they come to us for materials, they come to us either for the license or the access permission, which are 2 different things, but the distinction is rather lawyerly. And just considering the size of our collection and the demand for it, it is safe to say that we are oftentimes rather more reactive than proactive in what we are doing. Legally, there are very few regulations as to what we can or cannot make accessible and under which circumstances. Basically, we should treat everyone equal and provide access to our collection, and here I'm quoting the Czech audiovisual law, unless the intended use is contrary to good morals or the law, or serves to encourage or promote unlawful conduct." End of quote. So I'm not going to dwell on the definition of good morals, but for the sake of our discussion here, I will also simply conflate ethics with basically good curating, which for simplicity I will divide into two aspects, the external or reactive and internal. The external having to do more with how and to whom do we provide our stuff, and the internal with what we do ourselves under our name, and in the spirit of taking care not only of the film elements, but the Czech film heritage in a more abstract manner. So I will start with the external or reactive. There are many things that people want to do to films, and that some might not consider as good morals. But also we strongly believe that it is good morals to be as accessible as possible. Even over these 2 or 3 days, we have heard some examples, like with Jack Smith's films, that permanent marrying of image and sound in works where the relationship used to be originally more flexible. Or on a similar note, we have silent films that were to be most probably presented as silent, but regularly get to be shown with some sort of music. My favorite example is the aimless walk, the Spaziergang ins Blaue by Alexander Hackenschmidt, circulating most often with the most random piano music you can imagine. Silent film presentations are, of course, the most obvious topic, probably. The line between a film screening with live music and a music show where the film projection acts as a backdrop, which you sometimes can't even see, is a thin one. But as long as you are in the business of showing film, I believe there is such a line. There's live cinema concerts where a sound film is muted with a live orchestra bursting in whenever the producer or promoter of such an event feels appropriate. There's the fashion of sonification of silent film footage, not unsimilar to colorization in its arguments, sometimes being also these bizarre claims of more authenticity. A reference film for you might be, obviously, They Shall Not Grow Old, or if you want, They Shall Not Grow Bored. But this notion of just not being able to cope with silent footage unfortunately grew even into other more respectable projects. There's publishing projects where a soundtrack of a film gets ripped from a DVD release and published, chopped up into individual tracks, which basically constitute those parts of the film where there's no dialogue or sound effects. These tracks then even get assigned the most ridiculous artificial names. And even though, needless to say, all together and not as individual parts, they constituted a crafted and elaborate sound composition with no tracks, no names, or any nonsense like that. What unites these examples, though, is that we often allow them to happen, but not without trying to talk to the producers, filmmakers, promoters, and trying to talk them out of them first. Same, still rather unwritten policy is in place regarding the colorization process. We try to use all the soft power at hand to explain why artificial color doesn't add more authenticity to a black and white film, or the same with sound and silent footage. Needless to say, I'm talking here about a context where people still try to present the given film or material as what it supposedly is, and usually being absolutely non-transparent about what they did. I'm not talking about any artistic or creative reuse, which would only be taking the source material as a starting point. And what is crucial to mention at this point as well is that when it comes to copyright and the related rights, in the Czech Republic we have a rather strong moral rights codification, unlike in the United States or other common law jurisdictions, and similarly to the continental Europe, for example. Meaning the authors have the right not only to attribution, but also to the integrity of their work. And also, in the Czech Republic, and unlike in many other countries, including, for example, Germany, these moral rights are actually perpetual. So they get passed on to the heirs or estates or other representatives of the authors who can, in theory, claim this integrity or breach of integrity. Therefore, in practice, whenever someone approaches us wanting to use a film we preserve in a way that could constitute such a breach of integrity, we often go to the authors, their estates, or others to sanction that usage. And what do we do when all the above fails? We are, of course, happy that our collection gets used. That's what we are here for in the first place. We just don't condone these types of usage. We don't condone the types of usage we feel are not right or good curating, and try to do the things right when it comes to us handling some of these challenges ourselves. Which quickly brings me to my second part, which is the internal decision-making. There are many ethical or simply curatorial challenges in our daily practice. We have an archival cinema where we like to show films in their original medium, and that is from print, which we are fortunate to have many of. Naturally and unfortunately, we were part of the Eastern Bloc distribution sphere in the sense that the films coming from Soviet Union were distributed in Czechoslovakia, mostly in their Russian language versions. So for some of our retrospectives, for example, such as one we did recently of Georgian director Otar Yosseliani, we have to make a decision whether a screening from a print is more of a value than screening from a digital format, yet in the original, or at least say definitely preferred, Georgian language version. And the same goes obviously for many other films coming from what once were the Soviet republics. There's also elaborate decision-making in our restoration projects, which I'm not going to list, but will eventually be happy to elaborate on either myself or with the help of Jonáš Kucharský, who, as our curator of music and sound, gets all these dilemmas to solve. And I believe Sonia will be touching upon these as well. No matter the result, the key in these and most other decisions that we are trying to make is, of course, transparency and honesty. Jonáš is also someone who, following a rather implicit, unwritten policy, commissions new soundtracks and musical accompaniments for our restorations of silent films. We are putting a lot of effort into organizing them and producing them, but then also try to leave the space free for any other interpretation and curatorial decisions of those who want to show the films. So basically, we are not exclusive with our new scores. To conclude, I would say that we try not to be dogmatic, but rather counterbalance the frivolous attitude with which the outside world sometimes treats the cinematic heritage as pure content. In that light, I'm hopeful that we could see even more opening up gradually, more embracing of public domain, allowing for creative use, and also non-creative misuse or even abuse, which I believe we can productively reflect ourselves and through our practice assert our position as a memory institution which maintains good morals on all levels, striving to be the place which does the things right. Yeah, thank you.
Am I right to assume that it's quite rare that a state archive actually has a dedicated curator for sound and music?
We haven't. We're fortunate to have one. I don't know how exactly it looks like everywhere else, but we're fortunate to have one also because back in the day when we didn't have one, many of these decisions were done like semi-collectively on a very sort of, oftentimes like taste-based urgency or something. But now that we have someone who's a trained musicologist and has sort of the curatorial power and also trust to make these decisions, I think we're doing much better.
Yeah, I think about the work with musicologists, maybe Eunice will also tell us a little bit, but I'm asking this question as a person who has just invited the Cleaning Women, which is a Finnish collective that works with household equipment and cleaning robots to accompany a film from 1929. It was just at Il Cinema Ritrovato. It's a Georgian Soviet film called The Grandmother, and it was quite a spectacle, but we can maybe talk a little bit about this later. about the discrepancy of curating for audiences and making film heritage accessible and attractive as opposed to authenticity. But now I will hand over to Eunice.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is a practical listening session after some introductory remarks of myself, which will show what he said, music bursting onto the screen. And I chose specifically also very crass and stark examples to exemplify what happens with the image once you add music. I will use the sample of a colonial film from the iFilm Institute from 1913 because it comes out of a moment when I was confronted to, it was in a program of silent films, of short films, and I was supposed to do something with it. And I suddenly thought, what am I going to do with it? I cannot play some random piano music, as you mentioned it. And so I want to open up also the thinking about how to handle this body of films, which in my opinion is a very important one and should be treated in a way which is with good morals and good, etc., all the stuff. Coming from a European background with different migrational histories on both sides of my family, one of the earliest childhood experiences was realizing the difference of tones, undertones, and auditory cultures on both sides of my family. I became very aware of the soundscapes and hearing cultures and thus hearing expectations. In my work for silent film, the first work I do is indeed to watch the film silent and to paradoxically listen to the images, taking notice of what the images in itself reveal about the sonic world. And in this regard, I don't necessarily mean only the music and sounds they diegetically request, but rather the soundscapes and worlds that lie beyond the frames, as Petner already mentioned it on Tuesday in his discussion after his film. Then sometimes, because the words outside of the frame are in contradiction to what is narrated, quite often in silent film, you yourself determine, I as a musician and composer determine what will be played and heard, because original scores don't exist, are lost, or are missing. And as an additional task, you have the conservationist's requirement of delivering something that is aiming at being authentic and close to what initially the filmmaker or the modes of presentation at the time would have expected. Here, I must insert that hearing and listening, unfortunately, always and only ever happens in the present. We don't know and cannot know how people heard a score or music a century ago, which is about silent films. Our sonic environment is constantly changing and evolving, so are our ways of listening and understanding of what we are hearing. Music that was new and fresh and even cacophonic then became nowadays nothing short of a cheesy, way too sweet musical flavor, like in the case of Claude Debussy's music. Nevertheless, coming close to what initially might have been intended by the filmmaker or what is the original state of the material remains a topic while working in the archival world. The original way to present this colonial film would have been done with some light music at the time, either a piano solo or a small ensemble, or maybe even a narrator, because now we know it existed. They had also in Europe film narrators. That nowadays, for me, clearly wasn't and isn't an option. The topic of the colonial film is always obvious in its agenda, in the way the camera is placed, as well as the editing, and how the narration visually and through the intertitles unfolds. demonstrating the superiority of the colonizer, showing the exotic other, and demonstrating how now, with the colonizer present, life became so much better for the colonized. My main thought being, in thinking about the sound for these films, is that all that is carefully negated and intentionally left out could be present and should be present in the soundtrack, in the sounds we nowadays add. So that is clearly a deviation from what should be done from an archival standpoint. Okay, you're great. In order to crack to opening the crack between sound and image, as Asia said it yesterday. I show the beginning of a film which is called, I cannot say it in Dutch, so it's A Ride in Bandung. It's the capital of West Java in Indonesia, and was shot in 1913 by a certain J.C. Lamster. I will play you four music. I will have to be fast. And please, because we don't have the time to discuss this, ideally we would have time to kind of go back and forth and to discuss what happens. I will just play it, and you make notes, and maybe we can talk about it later. Okay. sound recording of West Javanese instrument called Curating, which is a small, which is called in German Maultrommel. You place it in the mouth and create these sounds with the mouth. And the next one and last one. And please always note how your gaze is shifting and what you notice and what you suddenly notice more or less, or what rhythms in the image and in what you see are picked up, or what is shifting in your experience of the images. Up to here. So that's the 4 examples. So for me, to finish this short talk, it is always about aiming at opening up the space for the film to be seen and for the audience to be able to see what the many layers of a film, and not what Hollywood does. It kind of narrows down what you see and what you experience on a soundtrack. This is like the contrary, and what I try to do is to open it up, to give as much space as possible while helping to bridge the gap to the filmic material. So that's from my side. Thank you.
It was interesting because I am Dutch originally, and so I was very concentrated on the titles in the beginning. We can speak about that later on. Yeah. We're still setting up. And also afterwards, would you like to react?
I just like to say that it really great example of like the only historical fact you can take for granted, I think, is that there was never one soundtrack. Like even if there was a composition, it was meant for a special occasion or given orchestra or sheet music, etc.
For this kind of films.
Yeah, no, even like, but generally speaking. So it was a great example in the variety of approaches, which is historically accurate. Yeah.
Okay, Sonia.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, and I'm very happy to be here participating at this panel, offering some theoretical thoughts about archival and curatorial practices. As the title of my paper suggests, Lost in Transition, the archival configuration of film sound, I elaborate on what I define a theoretical method or framework for conceptualizing film sound from the perspective of archival practices. Let me start with a somewhat provocative question lingering around in this assembly. Why is sound considered as a secondary, less important component of the filmic experience? And consequently, why is sound treated differently from the visual in curatorial practices? One possible explanation is what Levin and Jay defined as the hegemony of the visual in Western societies. The eye tends to dominate the other senses, sight is considered as the primary sensory organ, visual imagery informs dreaming and memory activities. With the transition from oral tradition to writing and printing, knowledge was stored and transmitted on visual devices, such as written documents and books. To some extent, Western-oriented film and media studies reflected this hegemony of the visual, focusing primarily on matters related to the image and the visual aspects of film. With few notable exceptions, such as the essay by Eisenstein, Adorno, and Eisner, sound was rarely studied and theorized as an essential subject of the filmic experience until the 1980s, when the first comprehensive studies dedicated to film sound by Schoen, Duan, and Altman, among others, came out. On the same line, film archiving was conceptualized looking at the image and visual component of film, considering that the discipline emerged at the time when restoring film meant restoring silent films. As an academic subject, film archiving was informed by fine art restoration, philology, and historiography. In light of this, it's not surprising that sound was not regarded as a significant aspect in film archiving from the very beginning. To illustrate this point, we can take one of the main reference books in the field, The Restoration of Motion Picture Film, edited by Meyer and Reed in 2000. Out of 300 pages, just 8 pages are dedicated to sound restoration. To date, there has been still a scarcity of article and contribution on the topic of film sound, archiving, and curating. Furthermore, sound is usually underrepresented in archival and professional discourses, although in recent years more attention was drawn by initiatives such as the 2019 edition of Film Restore Festival, and also the workshop organized by the National Film Archive in Prague the same year. There is still a diffuse reluctance in defining, analyzing, and describing film sound phenomena with a proper, objective, and scientific language. As argued by Rick Hellman, I quote, "It has never been easy to capture in words the phenomena of sound. While philosophers and technicians have developed concrete languages for describing images, sound has often seemed to require a more abstract terminology, drawing on the language of myth and the sacred, rather than that of three-dimensional reality." With the specific and technical vocabulary, while the specific and technical vocabulary is mostly used by professionals, musicians, composers, sound engineers, and sound designers, the common terminology used in relation to film sound is often vague, confusing, unclear. It is worth noting that the terms film sound and soundtrack are often used interchangeably, despite denoting two distinct aspects. The term soundtrack is shifty, as it can be applied to any recorded music that is synchronized to a movie, a television show, a video game, a commercial, or any form of moving image. Film soundtrack is often used to indicate the musical score of the film or the commercially released album, although music is only one component of the sound trace, together with dialogue, sound effects, and silence. From an archival standpoint, it is crucial to differentiate between the two terms, soundtrack and film sound. The soundtrack or sound trace is the physical trace of a sound recording on a specific carrier and in a particular format, which allows the sound to be played in synchronicity with the image. The term film sound, in my view, indicates the sound as it is played when the film is projected in a space or experienced through a device. It refers to the sound as heard and experienced and perceived by the audience. It consists of the sound waves as they are diffused and amplified in the physical space. I argue that, beside the issue of language, there is another aspect lying in the underrepresentation of film sound, that is the transitory and intangible dimension of film sound as a perceptual phenomenon. In other words, sound gets lost in transitions. In light of this premise, what does it mean to preserve film sound? Film sound archiving and curating practices raises many ethical, theoretical, and practical questions. What methods and approaches can be employed to preserve and restore film sound materials? What action can be taken to address the problems occurring with the passage of time from the decay of the film sound carriers to the dismissal of film sound devices? How can this action be recorded and documented? What are the prospects for the exhibition of historical film sound in present-day theaters? We assume that archiving practices should be aimed at preserving and presenting the original film sound, but how do we define it after all? Is it to be intended as the trace recorded on the film negative, as the trace recorded on film prints, or as the sound played back and experienced by the audience in a theater? To navigate these questions, I propose a theoretical framework for conceptualizing film sound. The archival configuration of film sound is based on 3 dimensions: the trace, the material form, and the performance. Archiving film sound means to deal with the dimension of trace in its 2 meanings. First, the physical trace, intended as the form of inscription of oral information on a carrier. And second, the memorial trace, which is the trace that film sound leaves in individual and collective memory through its reception. The material form, a term borrowed from artist Oriane Cesare Brandi, indicates the interrelation between matter and form, content and appearance in the work of art. I use this to define the aesthetic and acoustic quality of sound as it is played back, creating a particular soundscape. The performative dimension is significant when we think about live music accompaniment or different kinds of oral performances, from the embodiment in silent cinema to Japanese banshee and Korean pyeonsa traditions, or the East African film storytelling. But the performative dimension is present also in the case of screening with synchronized soundtracks, considering that the sound playback and amplification system also change how sound is experienced in a particular situation. Much more than for the image, there is no sound event that can be reproduced exactly the same in 2 different situations, since sound is a combination of a recorded signal, sound waves, and their diffusion and resonance in a particular space. In this sense, each film screening presents a different sound event, as argued by Altman. The performative dimension of film sound should also consider the audience's sonic performance, which is particularly lively in some cultural contexts. I watched some weeks ago the movie A Tribe Called Judah by Nigerian director Funke Akindele here in Berlin, together with a large Nigerian diasporic audience. Audience reaction were adding an additional layer to the movie's soundscape, supporting and cheering the action of the film. Keeping the audience silent during the screening might also be a form of the hegemony of the visual. This 3-dimensional configuration for defining film sound can be used to contextualize, formulate, and interpret the different ethical and practical approaches in archiving and curating film sound. The model complicates the conception of original film sound as being attached to a particular soundtrack, to a specific version. Moreover, it conceives film sound more in terms of soundscapes than in terms of soundtrack. This might be helpful to interpret early experiments with film sound in presentation of early cinema, such as the films Seemannsfrauen and Beyond the Rocks, restored by Hyde Film Museum in the early 2000s, in which spoken dialogues and sound effects were added to the traditional film music accompaniment. The final input I'd like to give regards one concept in archiving and curating film sound, that of noise. I do not intend here noise as sound effect, as part of the soundtrack together with dialogues, music, and silence. I'm referring to acoustic noise, which can be defined as unwanted, unexpected, sudden, annoying, irritating sound. In her book, Mechanical Sound, Karin Bisterfeld affirms that, I quote, "The perception of sound is now considered to be highly subjective. Psychologists argue that whether individuals are annoyed by a specific sound is not only dependent on the characteristic of that sound, such as its loudness, frequency, or periodicity. Equally irrelevant are one's psychological sound sensitivity and compulsivity, as well as the social context and perceived control." On the same line, Hillel Schwartz noticed that, quote, "By its very definition, noise is an issue less of tone or decibel than of social temperament, class background, and cultural desire, all historical and culturally determined. The perception of noise is not only subjective, but also culturally and socially constructed. What is considered noise today, and in this context, is different from what was considered noise 5, 20, or 50 years ago, or what is noise in other cultural contexts. With regards to film sound archiving, the concept of noise is defined in relation to audiovisual media technologies. In information theory, noise is an unwanted signal or disturbance that interferes with the operation of a mechanical device or media system. Noise is considered as anything extraneous to the message, as the background of information. It fills in the silences and disrupts the message. The term signal-to-noise ratio indicates the corresponding relation between wanted signal and unwanted background noise, and therefore the level of comprehensible meaning of the message. Early sound recording devices, such as cylinder phonographs and gramophones, produce high noise levels. The noises and crackles overwhelm the sound signal, which is also almost incomprehensible to a contemporary listener's ear. As a physical trace, film sound contains not only the recorded signal composed by dialogue, music, and effects, but also the unwanted noises that do not belong to the intended signal transmission. The restoration work operates primarily in the field of acoustic noise, intended as unwanted sound. There are noises inherent to the carrier, as pops and crackles, noise inherent to the device, like hiss and hums, the noises derived from the dispositive situation, as the one occurring during film exhibition and by handling the carriers, and the noise caused by the passage of time or by the physical decay of the carrier. Using post-production tool and sound equalization, restorers and curators eliminate or reduce the disturbing elements from the soundtrack, but this always impacts also the wanted signal. Restoring film sound means to decide which kind of noise should be erased or reduced, and to what extent the sound signal is going to be affected by these interventions. There are different approaches in archival practices, going from one extreme of eliminating all possible noises to the other of keeping the digitization almost untouched. Finding the right balance between reducing and keeping the noise is a major challenge of film archival practices, a challenge which is rarely thematized in archival discourses. While curators and professionals can easily detect distortion and misuses of restoring tool at the level of the image, what happens to sound comes rarely at the surface and remains unheard. Thank you for listening to Film Sound.
Thank you to all three of you for very different presentations and interventions. One thing I've been hearing with both of you is hearing expectations, if we speak about the presentation of film heritage. And a question I often ask myself, also as someone who organizes historical film programs, for whom are we doing this? What are we competing with? If we look at modern day recording practices, mixing practices, post-production practices, the way that soundtracks are being produced, how can film heritage possibly compete with this? Maybe, Eunice, would you like to start?
I can start. It's, I mean, on a technical level, I think most of the people would be aware of sort of historicity of sound when they, like, we have some example in the screening. There are some restoration, digitization. There are in which the elements, the historicity of film sound is more present, and other in which is less present. I also often wonder to what extent the broad audience is either disturbed or becomes aware of that. And also, I think this relativity, or like looking at the relativity of context and audience's background can, like people maybe from younger generation can be maybe more used to a certain kind of sound quality, or maybe be more like not used to a certain kind of historical sound, but I don't think, I mean, that this is necessarily something you can compete with, in the sense that you have to aim to that in doing a digitization or a restoration, because as I said, in the moment in which you intervene on the sound signal, you intervene on the whole signal. You cannot just, it's not like the image in which you can like extrapolate frames and just work on that. You intervene on the whole spectrum. So it's,
But there are also different standards for different media, like a television sound mix is different from one for the cinema. How do you deal with that in archival practices?
I think this is more like
I'll be just very brief with your original question, that I think we are actively, forming these expectations by the discourse we are sort of building around our presentations of film heritage. So I wouldn't say, as Sonia said, it's not a fight, it's not a battle we are fighting or anything like that, I think. It's, obviously I don't have any data, it's only anecdotal, but based on the anecdotal evidence from showing our restorations, which when we supervise them and work on them closely, or Jonas supervises them, might fall, generally speaking, into the more conservative approach. We don't sort of face that neither on the image or sound level, if I may again conflate these two things, because we usually try to work in sync when it comes to the level of retouching and the whole approach, the restoration approach to both the image and sound. So that, like, be it young audiences or older audiences, it's like if you present them with a film that has its past and sort of memory inscribed in it, it's actually easier to compete than if you were trying to make the film look like it was shot yesterday, only it's a historical film. So I think we are actively forming these expectations as film archives.
I mean, we're also aware of a certain amount of people refusing to watch black and white films, for instance.
Maybe I can add something in terms of our ears, the changing of our ears, because due to our urban surroundings, in our surroundings, in the urban environment, the level of decibels rises by 0.5% decibel per year. So that's why maybe you experience sirens of ambulances as ear-splitting, and which weren't ear-splitting maybe some years before. So in a way,
I mean, they've actually gotten louder too.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's because the environment, sonic environment gets, and soundscapes get so much more dense. So in order to compete with that, the mixing and mastering of whatever it is, it's always different mixes, because I'm also doing sound design, so you have always to keep in mind what end product you're mixing for. So of course, a cinematic or a TV, it's different. MP3, Spotify or whatnot is different than from the other. But these hearing expectations, which every one of us has a hearing CV, a vita. It's like you're listening and hearing a history. It's very individual, but it also it's dependent on the culture you grew up in. And the expectations are happening without you knowing, because, and especially in the Western world. In the Western world, we are not, as you said, we are not at all trained to keep track of that. And so it just happened. So just to tell a little anecdote of my silent film work, I happened to have an audience of 250 teenagers for Metropolis. That was before the final restoration, where it was even got longer, where the soundtrack got reworked and applied. So I had to play for Metropolis, and I suddenly realized that I was reacting. Besides the fact that the teenagers were behaving like in a action movie. They were going outside, they were coming in, they were talking. So I had to compete actually with this. I thought, I want to be heard. And so I suddenly realized that I was adopting the strategies of Hollywood mainstream blockbuster music making. And I was like, what is happening? But, and that was a very interesting moment for me.
And maybe if I just add a quick note, I think it's also a matter of some kind of contextualization. You don't have to give a lot of explanation, but if you present the film also like informing about how is the sound condition or the sound historical device. If you give just a quick explanatory note at the beginning, then the audience become aware, okay, this is part of that. So it's also part of the work of institution, I think, to sensibilize on this topic.
Yeah, I agree. We've had some discussions also about the expectations of audiences. I myself get very annoyed when people are rustling with crisps bags and not being silent. But I have to say the intervention by VJ was fantastic. That his audio comment to the film, that was a really interesting way of watching a film, and I think it's actually quite close to early opera and theater practice, which was also not a silent affair. It was people were actively engaging, people were having conversations during early opera performances. So the idea of sitting quietly is quite a new and bourgeois one, actually. Yes, I would like to. I think what I noticed during this assembly is that so far no one has spoken of AI. And when we are doing I'm sorry, I know it's it's everywhere, and it was a safe space, now it's not anymore. I do think we have to talk about it because, especially in sound, and let's see what are the opportunities and also the threats that you see. This panel is called "Does This Sound Right?" We're talking about ethics. What is going to happen with sound preservation, with film preservation in future? Where can AI be used? How will it be used? You already mentioned Peter Jackson as, well, they used lip readers, but I think in future we can expect many more sonifications of silent films and more experiences like that. If you would like to comment.
Yeah, I was trying to say basically that, yeah, let them, have a go at it. I mean, it's an opportunity for us to use the films and use that as as a chance to show the films in their original context, to show them as historical artifacts, without sort of gatekeeping them in our sort of little exclusive archival cinema or something. So when we can, I'd say, yeah, that's what we are here for people to, use the films that we preserve, and even if they decide to use them a way that we might not like, it's still, their right to be wrong, actually. So yeah, I think, technically speaking, there's been some, hints at AI usage already in both restoration process, and I think it can help greatly with cataloging, identification. Those of you who've witnessed the Foley installation we had, imagine having tens of thousands of hours of Foley tapes and sound tapes that you would like to link to the actual films. So then, yeah, let's run it through some scripts and see what we get. I mean, that's obviously as a tool in dealing with the massive amounts of audiovisual material or content. That's quite useful. And when it comes to these applications, then it's no different than if they were sort of judging the colors by whatever aesthetic consideration. Now, if it's the AI doing it.
Would you like to add something, the two of you?
I have some can tell from my side of the producing music is that, of course, everybody's scared about AI, but not so much. But because right now, what you can do running through IVA, it's called to create a track, is really merely what I would call elevator music, and you have tons and tons and tons of elevator music and the most generic genres which are created. But it might change, maybe, but what it still does, it forms the musical tastes, and it narrows down the musical tastes and variety, in my opinion. So, but still, we have to see. I still think I will be working as a composer, but let's see if it's the case.
Sonia, would you like to add something for the technical aspects of preservation, maybe?
I think, it's there are tools evolving, but I think what could be done to film sound in the digital realm is already pretty extensive, and nobody was really worried about it. It's a gray zone. Nobody really knows how much intervention, ethical or unethical, it's done. So I'm actually I think it starts before AI, let's say, and also the fact that if we think digital technologies were used for post-production and also for restoration, for film sound, before the image, nobody really cared about that. They start to talk about digital in relation, to be a problem when it touched the image. So it's I'm kind of observing this discussion and movements, from cultural analysis perspective, and it's interesting. But I mean, as I said, you don't need to have AI to distort, misuse, or also enhance film sound.
Because I would say it actually started like with remastering of like audio releases. That was like way before the restoration debate and the debates we are having in film archives. Like, is it like, you know, is it a good decision to use the original negative and do a 4K scan, even though people have seen these, you know, worn-out prints in cinemas? And this debate has been kind of like already lost with the audio and music releases, where, like, I don't know if there's any discourse or history of people who would actually sort of, you know, I don't know, object to, you know, going back to the Mac tracks and making a nice digital release of whatever in, like, already in late 70s or during the 80s when remastering first came in, right?
When it comes to curatorial practices, I think sound is very rarely the basis of decisions that are being made when we are making sound programs. Do you have experiences with this when film programs were made based on sound, on something that's specific? Like DFF had an exhibition called The Sound of Disney, which is kind of obvious to focus on that aspect with Mickey Mousing, etc. But from a point of view of a film festival or as curators?
I'm doing that exactly with the children's programs, because the experimental films I choose because I want to talk about the sound and listening, so it's a variety. That's actually, but of course, it also, the image is important and what happens and the connection of image and sound. So, of course, it's normal that is my viewpoint.
I don't think we ever ventured beyond like film composers' retrospectives, but we should. Good idea. There's a question there, and I think we have 10 minutes.
Yeah, let's maybe turn up the lights, and then we will open up the conversation. We have a bit more time, I think. Yeah. Very Czech of you.
Stop it.
Yeah, thank you so much. What a great panel. I'm glad to listen to your wise words. I'm part of the Foley panel tomorrow, so I keep it sweet and short. As a Foley artist, I would argue that my craftsmanship, I'm a live Foley artist mostly, that my craftsmanship hasn't changed in 100 years. And I would also argue that my professional heritage is created by noise. And that's what I criticize or challenge in my work, for example, also Rick Altman's theory. When you are talking about curating or cutting out noises, it always gives me kind of like this. How do you deal, what is the great moral standards in your work in dealing with noise? Because I would define myself as a noisemaker more than just created by a Foley artist, which is just coined by one man. So how do you deal with, for example, me as a Foley and questioning, okay, what is my sound history in your work?
I think we all love noise. And generally speaking, when we talk about restorations, the sort of maximum is like of actually the kind of like acceptable conservative approach might be to get rid of any interferences, noise, scratches, whatever that has accumulated on the elements that you are using during the time of their sort of preservation and copying and you know, making further generation dupes, etc. So if you are able to sort of identify these and distinguish these from whatever was there originally or whatever the audiences could have heard originally, you know, from a Tobis Clank audio system in a very sort of very different settings, then you have sort of done the job, like ideally, and no one has obviously, but we're striving to. But Sonia, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I touched a bit on it on the paper. It's there is a confusion on the term noise, but there is a distinction indeed between the wanted noise of the signal and the, let's say, unwanted noise of that comes with time, decay, or other factors. But I mean, it's not just making this distinction, which might be pretty easy. So the work of the artist is, of course, should be preserved as well. But the difficulty is really to kind of separate them and also try not to intervene too much in the sound signal when working with noise.
No further questions? Yes, Vincent.
Yeah, thank you, great panel. I want to come back to a point that Sonia made very forcefully, but that pertains to the other papers as well. Namely, I mean, you argued very strongly for the historicity and site specificity of sound and sound experience and the importance, let's say, of the spectator's body in producing sound. And you also talked about the fact, and you had a quote that indicated that silence is sort of a socially coded, it's a class privilege also, one could even say, to be living in silent environments, in urban environments that's that always has a price, literally, you pay a higher rent if you want to live in a silent apartment. But what I would like for you to talk about is the importance of audience response and the sounds that the audience produces. I mean, you briefly touched upon it. VJ Jr. talked about, he used the term vibe to describe the relationship between the speaker, the soundtrack, and the audience. And part of the challenge he had when commenting the film in English to an audience that wasn't used to the format was to establish the vibe, get us to respond, get a sense of how the audience would speak back to the film so that he could embed his performance in our reactions. And we could also probably connect that back to Pavitros Undar's presentation yesterday, which was partly about how film music and film sound transcends the cinema in India and becomes part of everyday culture and people listening, but also singing the songs.
We also have the Rocky Horror Picture Show in Western traditions, so it's, yeah. But
I want to share an anecdote, and maybe you can comment on that. Last year, Shah Rukh Khan had his big comeback in India. He made a film called Pathan, which was hugely successful. And basically at every screening, in the end, the film was structured in such a way that there was a song at the end, and in the end, people would storm the stage in front of the screen and dance. And it became sort of a ritual, and there were all sorts of videos circulating on Twitter and other social networks, and it became a reinforcing trope, so people went to the screenings to actually do that. But one thing I realized when I saw the film in a big single-screen theater in Delhi was, and I've seen many Indian films, but very few in those large popular settings, is the extent to which the films are structured for a call and response experience with the audience. That, the first entrance of Shah Rukh Khan, where he bares his chest and you see all the muscles, you realize that shot is actually extra long for the audience to vocally appreciate what they're seeing. And then a few days later, I went back and watched another film featuring Ajay Devgan, and there was literally no one in the cinema. It was a weekday, and the only people who shared the space with me were the ushers. And they provided the soundtrack. So basically, they went into the call and response mode. There were like 3 or 4 of them, but they made sure that there was noise in the cinema and made the film more readable for me. So that's like a cultural pattern that's very strongly developed, and the response of the ushers in the second screening showed me that they felt something was missing when there was no noise in the cinema. So maybe you could talk about that and how that is also a challenge for film history and curatorship.
Yeah, I can just say that for me it was a similar experience. Like, I've been watching a lot of Nigerian movies for my research in the recent years, but it totally was another kind of experience, having this enriched soundscape with the audience. It's like I now want to just watch the movies with the audience, because it's really it's not just another level at the level of the soundscape. It's also in the film dramaturgy. It changes in a way the dramaturgy, and and as you said, to some extent, these films are constructed with the audience responses in mind, and also, yeah, it's. I mean, I had the impression to be more like in a concert or in a football, Spiel, than in a film theater. It's like you are bodily involved, because these, like, and I think someone spoke 2 days ago about this involvement of body and skin in sound reception, and I think it's really that, like, when you are surrounded by people making noises, and it's another level of reception. And also, also soundtrack could be loud, and especially now, like with Dolby Atmos and so on, they are also appealing to a certain bodily reaction, but it's different when it comes from the people around, and it's like a different kind of experience. And maybe just a quick note, I've realized that there seemed to be a new tendency from this kind of oral storytelling also in Western cultures, because I've seen there are in San Francisco and Los Angeles some poets who are doing live movie storytelling. So it seemed to be a second or third orality comeback as well, which is part also of the eventization of the moving experience. But I'm looking forward to, or also what Simone does with the Foley performances. So it's,
I think this brings us back to the example of the cleaning robots in stage in front of a silent film. The performative aspect of it, I think it becomes more important also with festivals and audience interaction. I mean, I do think that a film itself can also definitely vibe with an audience. This depends very much on the context, and of course, cinema is a highly manipulative art form. And I think when people are touched or are actually crying in the cinema, it's usually because of the sound. It's almost never because of the image or the music. Maybe Eunice, you would like to add something
in the crying.
How do you work with the vibe? How do you start the vibe?
I mean, the difference of our ears is indeed we listen with our body, and that's the difference to our visual perception, and it's always important for me to engage and to kind of trigger something on that level, but our experience is so often, because Hollywood kind of manipulates us ruthlessly, and we kind of incorporated these manipulations, which I see in the younger generations, the ability to kind of listen to a piece of music and not connect it with an emotional state, and saying it's sad, it makes me shivers, it's whatnot, or a sound, even a simple sound is connected to an emotional state. And it's difficult to kind of separate it, which was 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, it was still possible. And is to perceive sound, and also not only noise, but also notes with frequencies, because that's what they say is a difference, in an acousmatic way, that we kind of have a noise and work with it, and this is kind of getting less possible by the
There's actually a lot of scholars in musicology that write of the psychology of music, and a lot of the argument is that certain harmonies are definitely connected to certain human emotions.
Yeah, but that's to be contested, because I know that's a direction, but no, that's no, that is always that has to take in all the cultural heritage and upbringing, everything goes into it. And of course, I would agree that we learn this is connected to happiness and this is connected to sadness.
About the use of consonants and or what you call dissonance.
Yeah, it's like, and it's very recent. For example, Bach. If we go into the classical thing, 1750 he died. So with him, the minor pieces still ended with a major triad, and so the idea of it has to kind of the idea how a music piece should end in order for us to feel that it's ending is relatively new in the Western world. And so this is something which is built up, which is kind of happening, and there's nothing like I'd say I'm very adamant in that it's there is a physiological connection to something like that.
Are there further questions in the audience? Yes, over there.
I mean, I would disagree with the fact of bringing Hollywood all the time, because whether it's Einstein or whether we are looking at Siga Vertov or whether we are looking at Indian cinema, of course, sound is the psychological impetus to framing. And wouldn't you say, and this is my question, and maybe it's banal, wouldn't you say that often sound is seen as a secondary element when it's actually not in the framing of the image?
I would agree, just coming from my experience as a festival director who watches like 1,500 films a year, modern ones mostly. A lot of them have terrible, I'm just going to call it soundtrack now for the sake of simplicity. And I think the reason for that is because the director is not an expert on the audiovisual, is not very interested in sound and music, and just invited like his buddy to compose the soundtrack, especially in films that do not have a higher budget. It's often very, very random and then oriented towards Hollywood, but still it has an impact on you. Definitely, I would agree with that. But,
yeah, and it is done like that's the last stage. There is no time, no money left, and you're supposed to do magic, and you can't. And then you have directors who don't know what they want. You deliver minutes and minutes of music, and they say, no, it's not quite that. I'd like something else. And so you do more and more, and in the end, he comes back to the first, or she, to the first draft.
But just one thing, but even in the demonstration you did, we had between Ligeti, the Japanese gamelan, other, maybe Eric Satie.
Please talk into the microphone.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Even the demonstration you did with Ligeti and the gamelan, and maybe Satie, I'm not sure which other composers, but clearly the sound created the psychological impetus, even in those short images, you know, even in those found images. So I think, wouldn't you say that there is a difference in the way how sound is constructed in a narration film versus dealing with sound, found footage, or dealing with non-linear, let's say, a dynamic of how images are presented?
Definitely. The demands are different. It's like you, indeed, I mean, if you talk about contemporary films, you have to serve emotion. That's what they want. And in the silent films by now, it's, of course, you want to trigger an emotion. Sure, that's what...
May I just return back to this point and to the examples that you showed us? If you can maybe briefly comment on that, because I think your question was really relevant. How do we adapt music for silent films in the colonial context? So, what was your what were your ideas, or how did you face the process, or what are your thoughts about the different examples you showed us?
So the thoughts were, I wanted to create, of course, a drastic contrast from one. Then I wanted to show a Western idea of how you could, what was played, like the majestic, pathetic thing in the beginning, emperor-like march thing, of waltzing over everything what comes in front of you. The second one was the idea I wanted to create in contrast in orchestration, that you have a solo instrument versus a big orchestra, which is always a very important decision, also in terms of documentary or I think it's so. And the two other tracks were indeed recordings of traditional gamelan. It was also from West Java, where I wanted to show what happens when you have the sound world of the place where these images are taken from, when you add them to it. And I hope it's not only in my imagination or in my impression, even though I'm not Indonesian, that it adds a body to what the other two tracks didn't do. They just went waltzed over it. And so my idea was that ideally you should always, one would always work with musicians or the musical tradition of the places if you show these films, and connect them with the images, because then you open up the image and you are, in my opinion, ethical in the way that you give back the at least the body of sound to where it was taken from.
We have two more questions, Stephanie, and then Jutta. And
I have the same question, but I would like to add something, because Eunice was introduced as our house pianist, and before Eunice we had Willy. Does anyone remember Willy Sommerfeld? Yeah. Willy Sommerfeld was playing the piano at the Arsenal for decades, and he played, he accompanied films that he had already accompanied when they were new. He died at the age of 104, and he played the piano until he was, I think, 102. So Arsenal kind of came with him. We never questioned that. He was a wonderful person. I think we all adored him. He was really amazing. But he had like a limited range of sets of, how do you say that, sequences that he would repeat always. And then Eunice came and really helped me, and I think the Arsenal audience, really to understand or to see silent movies completely new, in a new way, through creating a dialogue between her and the film and inviting us to participate in this dialogue. And I think this is different from psychology. This is more about reception and really opening up a space, a cinematic and auditorial space that helps us to really engage with the film, to interact with the screening situation. So I just wanted to say this. It's not a question for Eunice, it's more like a comment about your work. We are very happy to have you. And please also turn 104 and play until you're 104.
And Arsenal, please turn 104 as well.
Easily.
So, but to just say, because in my perception of the situation in the cinema is one of a trio. There is the film, there is the audience, and there is me as the one who brings the music in, and it's a constant dialogue between these three. And so, of course, I have ideas and I have what I want to play, but sometimes I realize no, the film needs something else, and the audience as well. So it's kind of I adapt it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a short comment about that music or sound always is the last part of the production and that there is no money. You can see it, how it is different I don't know if it's still so, but all the older animation films, there was a sound and the music, the first part after the storyboard.
That's the Mickey Mousing.
Yeah, and not just there. Even I know that from the East German kids' TV, the animation films that were produced so too. So you have the music and then you animate the film. And then you can see how the music or the sound is part of the film and pushing what happens. And even if you maybe do not like the music, but it's completely different. And then it's a film where everything is together working.
Yeah, I think we didn't speak about animation at all during this assembly. Do we have time for one? No, yeah? Okay. The boss says yes.
Thank you, Sonia, for telling the story of decades of disregarding the soundscape in film history and film scholarship. I was wondering, looking at contemporary avant-garde film, maybe we live in a period where the image is not that dominant anymore in avant-garde film. If I go to Oberhausen and I see 50 short films, 25 are driven by a voice-over narration now. So something is changing. The comeback of the essay film with a dominant importance of the words and of sound in general that might focus or might lead us to a new interest in the sound. This is just one question I have, if you agree, and the other question goes to Eunice, with all the respect to your wonderful piano work. I mean, speaking of Hollywood cinema as, narrowing down the image with the soundtrack in an age when we have composers like Hilda Gudnadottir, who won the Oscar for The Joker, for example, or we have Howard Shore, who works for David Cronenberg and for Peter Jackson at the same time. I think Hollywood cinema has never narrowed down images. This is what Eisner and Adorno would have said. But isn't that a reason why the soundtrack was never taken seriously that much? Because people were looking down at Hollywood composers such as Korngold and these guys as conventional. And again, thank you for the Narodny Film Archival view. One of the most popular films you have, I think, is 3 Nuts for Cinderella, with a score by Karel Svoboda. And this film is playing with live music to kid audiences in Germany very successfully. And for many people, this kind of popular film music is the first experience to symphonic experiences. So this film plays an important part, I think, in educational, in music education. So even a less sophisticated music, such as Karel Svoboda's score for 3 Nuts for Cinderella, can lead people to a new experience of the great art of music. Thank you.
Good luck. Were there questions, or these were just comments? I agree that Hollywood film is a very broad range, and to say Hollywood composers, but I think we all know what you mean. It's like a sauce that's on top of the film, and it's manipulative, but there's other examples, of course.
You mean the narrowing down? What I said, no, I'm meaning narrowing down, not the soundtrack is narrowing down, because indeed, since New Hollywood, we had a really transformation on the soundtrack level, on the sound, soundtrack, understanding in the use of how it was worked on and thought of. What I meant with narrowing down is that the musical tastes, because of the monetization of what is monetized and when and how, that narrows down what is then commissioned, for example, because most of the films nowadays get sync music. Sync music are the libraries which were the cue. Erne Rappé, the cue sheet, big collections of short pieces, classical pieces that we had in the silent era. Now we have, it's still the same, exactly the same way to catalog and sort it. It's emotion, it's action, and we have the sync music, and the sync music is quite, it's always needs to be, so the demands are, it needs to be authentic, you can't use samples, you're forbidden to do it, but you have to kind of meet a very narrow taste and style and genre definition, and that makes it somehow similar. Everything becomes more similar in the musical part, at least in the musical section.
I think we can continue this discussion endlessly, but maybe we do that outside. I would like to thank our panelists. Thank you. Thank you to the audience.